Shalom, I'm Tony Robinson with Restoration of Torah Ministries, and today we're going to be studying Reuben's sin with Bilhah. And the text for our study today is Genesis chapter 35, verse 22, and it states, "When Israel was living in that region, Reuben went in and slept with his father's concubine, Bilhah, and Israel heard of it." Okay, that's our text. So the question that I want to ask today is, why did Reuben do this? In other words, what was his motivation? As you read through the stories of the Tanakh, you're going to read many stories, and you'll see the actions of the protagonists and the antagonists, but quite often their motivation is not given. And so we need to, in some circumstances, we need to determine the motivation for an action so that we can properly interpret the passage. And so immediately, one thought that would come to mind, especially in today's world, was this a love affair of some sort? Was Reuben in love or with Bilhah, or was the main motivating force behind this union some type of sexual attraction? And that would especially in America these days, you know, with love novels, soap operas, etc., it can be very easy for a believer to read this text and think that this situation was motivated either through the flesh because of sexual desire or because of love of some sort. But many times, quite often, what we'll find is that the answers to some of these seemingly difficult passages, or the answers to why people do the things that they do in the Tanakh, many times those answers will be found as we make thematic connections. And again, you know, as we've said, you know, I personally believe that this is Adonai's way of interpreting Scripture, to allow Scripture to interpret Scripture. And I think when we do that, then we enter into His wisdom. Because remember, the primary goal that I have, and that I hope that you have when you read Scripture and interpret it, is that we understand Adonai's opinion versus our own preconceived ideas. In other words, we want to know what He thinks about the passage, and not what we think. So we should be more interested in His interpretation and not our own. But sometimes we can only see one point of view because of our own experiences, okay? And that can't even be debated. I'm sure all of you realize that there are certain times when you have interpreted a passage, and the reason why you interpreted it the way you did is because of your own experiences. But many times, the real causes of events that we read in biblical stories are totally at odds with our own opinions and with popular wisdom. Okay, you know, an example would be of Onan, who would cast his seed to the ground so that he would not impregnate Tamar, his brother's wife. Okay, many people will read that passage and see that as a proof text that would be that's why Adonai killed him. And I'm not condoning that, of course, but what I want to say is that that's not the reason why he was killed. The reason why he was killed is because he knew that the son to be born, if Tamar had gotten pregnant, he knew that the son to be born would then become the firstborn. And he didn't want that. Since his brother had died, he was naturally next in line to be the firstborn. He wanted to have the firstborn status, and that's the reason why he would not bring up seed to his brother. And I can remember as a young Christian, when I read this passage back in the early 80s, I thought erroneously that that's why Adonai had slew him. I didn't have any idea about firstborn or anything like that. And so I was just not interpreting the passage correctly. So in other words, what we want to do is we want to make the proper thematic connections, because Adonai has arranged His words thematically so that we can learn things that aren't explicitly stated. And it's not that they're not explicitly stated. They are explicitly stated. They're explicitly stated thematically, though. And so many times there are many, many truths, as many of you are learning as you study with Restoration of Torah Ministries, that are between the lines. And that's the reason why I have that song at the beginning and ending of some of these teachings, written by a friend of mine named Joe Mills. It's called Between the Lines, and quite often studying thematically helps you, quote unquote, read between the lines. So let's do that today. The first thing that I want to do is I want to talk about a popular midrash that many of you have heard, and many of you read this in your, if you have a Chumash, or which is a Jewish translation of the first 5 books of the Bible, or if you have the Tanakh, let's say the Art Scroll, the stone edition of the Tanakh, you'll read this in the commentary. But there is a popular midrash which states that Reuben simply moved Jacob's bed from Bilhah's tent to Leah's tent. In other words, even though the text states that that Reuben went in unto Bilhah, and we know that that means that he had sexual relations with her, even though the text says that explicitly, there is a midrash that says that no. What he did was he simply moved Jacob's bed from Bilhah's tent to Leah's. So let's read the basis of this Shabbat 55b. Let's read this, and it says, because he switched around his father's bed, the Torah treats him as if he slept with her. Now, why did he switch and desecrate his bed? When Rachel died, Yaakov took his bed, which was placed most frequently in Rachel's tent rather than the other tents, and Yaakov put his bed in Bilhah's tent. Reuben came to protest his mother's insult. He said, if my mother's sister was a rival wife to my mother, should the maidservant of my mother's sister now become a rival wife to my mother? Therefore, he made the switch. Okay, so let's deal with midrashim here. I'm not gonna go into depth here, but I just want to give you just a couple of basics about midrashim. The midrashim are not to be taken literally. For some of you who may not have heard of midrashim, the midrash or midrashim, these are stories, embellished stories that add other facts to the stories in the Tanakh. They kind of sometimes they kind of go into outer space. They say things that are directly at odds with the text often. And but the first thing is that they are not to be taken literally. Now, I know that you will go to many Jewish sources which will say that they are to be taken literally, but they are not to be taken literally. And at some point, well, in this next book that I'm writing, I'm going to deal with the midrashim, and I'm going to show you how many of the rabbis will correctly note that they are not to be taken literally. The Rambam himself, one of Judaism's great teachers of the Torah, explicitly stated that they're not to be taken literally. But because they are in the Talmud, and because Jewish people, many Jewish rabbis teach that the Talmud, which is the oral law, that it is equal to the Torah. Because of that, many people read these stories and just say that they're true, but they're not. But the rabbis, what they did with the midrashim is they used the midrashim to convey thematic truths by way of simile and metaphor, etc. So in other words, the literal story of the midrash is not what's important. What's important is the themes or the underlying message that they're trying to convey. And you can only get at this underlying message if you understand the themes that they are using to weave the midrash story together. And that's where people get confused. Just think about the midrashim concerning the Akedah, the binding of Isaac. In the midrashim, they say that that Abraham literally slew Isaac. Well, the text says that Abraham did not slay Isaac. So how could they say that he did? Well, they were dealing with some important themes there. And actually what they were dealing with were some messianic themes that are clearly seen thematically in the passage. It's just that they didn't know at that time how to properly judge those themes and how to properly weave those themes into the story. And so they made up these midrashim about Isaac dying and going to heaven for 3 years to be healed, etc., etc. But bottom line is they're not true. So the point is that we get into trouble when we think that they are to be taken literally. So do not take them literally. And this happens with many messianics too. Messianics look to them as if they're written as historical facts. Okay, there are many things. There's some things in the book of Jasher and some of the other and then some of rabbinic writings that are midrashim. They're not true. And so to think that they are true or to interpret them or use them as if they were truth is wrong. And as I said, the next book that I write is going to cover that material. But the midrashim are not to be taken literally. Now, what I want to do is I want to give you a part of the commentary from my stone edition of the Art Scroll Tanakh regarding Genesis chapter 35. Verse 22, I believe it is. Okay, it states this: Reuben's error and partial vindication. Now listen to what they say. After Rachel's death, Jacob established his primary residence in the tent of Bilhah, Rachel's maidservant. Reuben considered this an affront to his mother Leah, so he moved Jacob's bed to her tent. This is all that transpired, Shabbat 55b. Scripture describes it as starkly as if Reuben had sinned grievously, because the conduct of great people is measured by an infinitely higher standard. Now, what I want to say is that this is patently wrong and incorrect, and it's just not right. And I know that this is a comment in the Tanakh, and you probably read something similar to it in your Chumash, but it's patently wrong, and it's silly as a matter of fact. The text said what it meant, and it meant what it said. And again, they're taking their cue from this Midrash, Shabbat 55b. And but again, you see they are taking this Midrash as if it's true. And see, this is the problem. When even the learned scholars, even when they try to do this. Now, there's a reason why they're doing this. You're going to notice that in many of the instances when the forefathers sinned, in the Chumash and in the Tanakh, the commentators, they're going to kind of gloss over their sin. They're going to try to lessen their sin. They're going to say, oh, well, they didn't really sin. Or as you see here, Reuben's partial vindication. Again, all of this is ridiculous. You read with David's sin with Bathsheba, how they'll say, well, it wasn't technically adultery, and he didn't technically murder Uriah, and just all sorts of other silly things. So the bottom line, though, is that the midrashim are not to be taken literally, and this is what we need to know. When a midrash puzzles us, okay, we would do well to remember this statement of the Rambam, and he said that our sages sometimes express themselves in a manner that needs decoding. And this is true. This is true of the midrashim. We must interpret midrash and not always read it simply at face value, which is what most people do who aren't familiar with the midrashim. It is our task and our duty to seek the inner meaning behind the midrashic words of Chazal. Chazal is just an acronym for our, I think it's for our blessed teachers of memory, of memory. That's not it exactly, but basically it's saying the sages of the past. That's who Chazal are. In my experience, we reveal a world of, in my experience, we will reveal a world of subtlety and sophistication, expression of poetry and allusion, readings of innuendo and irony. The world of Midrash is complex and rich. Those who see only the surface miss its beauty and wisdom. So again, from one of the greatest Torah commentators in Judaism, you are not to take the Midrashim at face value. They need to be decoded. There is an inner meaning. There are themes that are woven subtly with sophistication throughout these stories. There's a lot of poetry, allusion, simile, and metaphor, innuendo, and irony. Okay? And so do not take them literally. Okay? This quote up here that I just used right here was taken from the Torah commentary on Parashat Vayishlach by Rav Alex Israel of Har Etzion Yeshiva, and his Torah portion entitled "Cover Up" or Peshat. Okay, so let's deal with the verse. Now that we've talked about the fact that it's a midrash and that there's a deeper meaning, and you're not to take the midrash literally, which says that he simply moved her bed. Let's deal with the text. Let's deal with what actually happened. While Israel was living in that region, Reuben went in and slept with his father's concubine, Bilhah, and Israel heard of it. Period. Okay? So first thing we want to do is we just want to give you a little bit more thematic proof that Reuben literally had relations with Bilhah, Jacob's concubine. Okay? I mean, the text is plain enough. We could stop right here and just say, look, he had relations with Jacob's concubine, period. But let's do this. Let's make another thematic connection to another event in Jacob's life that involves sexual sin. And that's Genesis 34, verse 5. It says, when Jacob heard that his daughter Dinah had been defiled, his sons were in the fields with his livestock. So he did nothing about it until they came home. So what we see here are two passages where someone violated one of Jacob's women, and in one case his concubine, in the other case his daughter. And notice how both texts say that he heard about it. The Genesis 35:22, it says, and Israel heard of it. In Genesis 34:5, it says, when Jacob heard that his daughter had been defiled. It says he did nothing about it. Okay, so these are two texts that have two similar themes about Jacob hearing about it and Jacob doing nothing. Okay, in both passages Jacob heard, and in both passages he did nothing. When Dinah was raped, Jacob didn't respond until when Dinah was raped, Jacob did not respond, and after Reuben took Bilhah, he didn't say anything. As a matter of fact, if you look in verse 23, the next verse, after it states that Reuben took Bilhah, we simply read of a genealogy. So it's as if he didn't do a thing. So these are just a couple of thematic connections that connect two wrongful sexual unions with Jacob's passive response. Okay? So in other words, the point that I'm making is because of the similarity in themes between Reuben going into Bilhah and of Shechem going into Dinah, we know for a fact that when Shechem went into Dinah that it was a literal sexual union. I'm suggesting to you that the similarity of themes between these two passages also suggests that Reuben literally went into Bilhah. So again, we want to interpret this passage thematically. And so what we should do is we should look for other passages that have thematic connections. Now, what's our story at hand? Our story at hand is a son who goes into his father's concubines. So a son who has relations with his father's concubines. Well, this is not new to Torah or to the Tanakh. There are other stories of sons having relations with their father's wives. And again, because we study thematically, we're going to look at these other stories and see what we can learn from them. In other words, again, our goal is to determine Reuben's motivation for going into Bilhah. Was this just some sordid love affair, or what was really going on? So the first example I want to look at is in 2 Samuel 16, verses 20 through 23. And this is a story about how Absalom, when he tried to take over the kingdom from David, he went into 10 of David's concubines. And so we read, Absalom said to Ahithophel, give us your advice. What should we do? And Ahithophel answered, sleep with your father's concubines, whom he left to take care of the palace. Then all Israel will hear that you have made yourself obnoxious to your father, and the hands of everyone with you will be more resolute. So they pitched a tent for Absalom on the roof, and he slept with his father's concubines in the sight of all Israel. Now in those days, the advice of Ahithophel that Ahithophel gave was like that of one who inquires of God. That was how both David and Absalom regarded all of Ahithophel's advice. So what was going on here was that Absalom wanted some advice on how he could solidify the kingdom in his control. In other words, he didn't want people to rebel along with him, only to have them be faint of heart and think, well, this is going nowhere. And when David gets back, I'm going to be in trouble. Absalom wanted the people who participated with him in the rebellion to know beyond a shadow of a doubt that he was totally repudiating the leadership of his father. Basically, he was going to kill his father and they wouldn't have to worry about David. And this is the advice that Ahithophel gave. He said, look, you take your concubine, you take your father's concubines, and you go into them in front of the sight of all Israel, and everybody is going to know that you hate your father. That's basically what he was saying. So again, remember, we're trying to answer the question concerning Reuben's motives. Now, because some people may feel that, may think that it was simply a sensual act. Now, I'm not excusing Reuben. I am going to suggest to you that it was not just a sensual act. It wasn't a love affair. I'm not excusing him from what he's doing, but what I'm trying to do is get at his true motivation. So what we've done is we've found a thematic connection between the story of Reuben going into Bilhah. We found another story. It's the story of Absalom sleeping with his father's 10 concubines. The themes are exactly matching. And so what we want to ask is, why did Absalom sleep with David's concubines? Okay, well, clearly from the text, we can talk about what it was not. It was not an act of romance. It had nothing to do with love. It was not even sensual in any way. That's not the motivation for why Absalom slept with David's concubines. The text tells us. And basically, it was a political act meant to show that the son, Absalom, had totally repudiated the leadership of David, his father, number one, and that he was assuming the leadership role of his father. That's what it meant. Now, I know that maybe in our eyes today in 20th century America, we may not have gotten the connection ourselves, but the Tanakh is very clear on telling us why Absalom slept with David's concubines. He was acting on the advice of Ahithophel. Okay, so we see that it was totally a political act, repudiating the leadership of his father, and a bold statement that I am assuming leadership, because that's what Absalom was doing. Absalom was taking control of the kingdom. Okay, however, in the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses may every truth be established. So we will read in 1 Kings 2, verses 19 through 25. Now let's read this. When Bathsheba went to King Solomon, well, let me give you a little bit of background about this. This is a story of Adonijah, how Adonijah tried to stage a comeback. You'll remember that not only did Absalom rebel against David and try to take over the kingdom, Adonijah, David's other son, also tried to take over the kingdom. And during the process, what happened is David made a preemptive strike by going ahead and crowning Solomon as king. Well, Adonijah, along with Joab and Abiathar the priest, they, even though they wanted Adonijah to be king, they wound up obviously being under suspicion once Solomon became king. Basically, Solomon told Adonijah, look, I'm going to spare your life. I'm not going to kill you, because Adonijah was going to kill Solomon, by the way, if he had been able to become king. But Solomon said, I'm not going to kill you as long as you behave yourself. You behave yourself. You don't show any type of what's the word I'm looking for? If you don't have any aspirations towards trying to take my kingdom from me, I'll let you live in peace. Okay, so that's the storyline. Now, what happened though is Adonijah he didn't get the message, and at one point he went to Solomon's mother Bathsheba, and he walked up to her and said, "Hey, you know that really the kingdom belongs to me. All Israel wanted me to be king, and so this is what I want you to do. I want you to ask your son Solomon to give me Abishag as a wife. Now, Abishag was one of David's concubines. She was the beautiful young virgin who they put in David's bosom so that David could stay warm when he was older. So we pick this story up in 1 Kings 2:19. When Bathsheba went to the king Solomon to speak to him for Adonijah, the king stood up to meet her, bowed down to her, and sat down on his throne. He had a throne brought for the king's mother, and she sat down at his right hand. "I have one small request to make of you," she said. "Do not refuse me." And the king replied, "Make it, my mother. I will not refuse you." So she said, "Let Abishag the Shunammite be given in marriage to your brother Adonijah." And listen to what King Solomon said. Now, just note that when she asked that Abishag be given to Adonijah, remember Abishag was David's concubine, even though he never had relations with her. Abishag was David's concubine, and here Adonijah is the son of David wanting to marry her, i.e., he wants to go in and have relations with her. King Solomon answered his mother, and notice what King Solomon said. "Why do you request Abishag the Shunammite for Adonijah? You might as well request the kingdom for him. After all, he is my brother. Yes, for him and for Abiathar the priest and Joab, son of Zeruiah." Because you remember that Abiathar and Joab, they were part of the rebellion of Adonijah when he tried to take over the kingdom from David. Then King Solomon swore by the Lord, "May God deal with me, be it ever so severely, if Adonijah does not pay with his life for this request. And now, as surely as the Lord lives, he who has established me securely on the throne of my father David and has founded a dynasty for me as he promised, Adonijah shall be put to death today." So King Solomon gave orders to Benaiah the son of Jehoiada, and he struck down Adonijah, and he died. And so, once again, we have a clear thematic connection between the stories of Adonijah and Reuben. So again, we ask the question, why did Adonijah desire to have Abishag as a wife and sleep with her, being that she was David's concubine? Again, let's talk about what it was not. It was not an act of romance, okay? Now, and we know that because we know from Solomon's response. But what was it? It was a political act meant as a first step for Adonijah to take over the kingdom from Solomon. Okay? How can we not note how Solomon, the wisest man to ever live, interpreted Adonijah's request? He looked at his mother and said, "What are you doing? You might as well ask that he be given the kingdom." Solomon knew what was going on. Solomon understood this idea that when a son wants to sleep with his father's concubine, that it's an act of a repudiation of his leadership and a self-exaltation of that son, saying that basically a power statement saying, "I'm going to rule." And so as you can see, again, there's a common motive between Adonijah and Absalom, okay? It was a repudiation of the current leadership of the family. Okay, and so as I said, in the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses may every story be established. Let's look at a third story, thematically connected to Reuben going into Bilhah. This one is found in 2 Samuel chapter 3, verses 6 through 11. During the war between the house of Saul and the house of David, now look at what it says here. Avner, and remember he was the commander of the army, Avner had been strengthening his own position in the house of Saul. Now notice that. He is strengthening his own position in the house of Saul. In other words, he's making political moves so that he can be at the top. Okay, so that when things shake out, he's going to be in a prominent position of leadership. You see the context. Avner had been strengthening his own position in the house of Saul. If I haven't heard a phrase that describes politics as clear as this one, then I haven't had one. But now note what the very next sentence says within the context of someone trying to make political maneuvers directly in the same context. Note what it says. Now Saul had a concubine named Rizpah, daughter of Aiah, and Ishbosheth said to Abner, "Why do you sleep with my father's concubine?" And I can almost leave it at that. But Abner was very angry because of what Ishbosheth said. So he answered, "Am I a dog's head on Judah's side? This very day I am loyal to the house of your father Saul and to his family and friends." In other words, Abner's saying, Abner knows what Ishbosheth is saying. Abner knows that Ishbosheth is basically saying, you're trying to make political maneuvers because you want to show that you've repudiated the leadership of this house and you want to take control. And so Abner knows that, and so he counters it by saying, I'm loyal to the house of your father Saul and to his family and his friends. He says, look, I haven't handed you over to David. Yet now you accuse me of an offense involving this woman, May God deal with Abner, be it ever so severely. Notice the similarity of phrase here between what Abner says and what Solomon said. Okay, be it, if I do not do for David what the Lord promised him on oath and transfer of the kingdom from the house of Saul and establish David's throne over Israel and Judah from Dan to Beersheba. Ishbosheth did not dare say another word to Abner because he was afraid of him. So again, notice how Ishbosheth's accusation occurred in the immediate context of Abner strengthening his own position in the house of Saul. Again, can we not see the connection between going into the king's concubine and political gain for leadership? And this is why Abner maintained that he has been faithful to Saul's house. You know, why? Because he did not, according to him, he did not go into Rizpah the concubine, which was obviously a political act of usurpation of authority. So we've had 3 witnesses, and we have a total of 4 stories of someone going into the king's concubine. We have Absalom's rebellion, Adonijah's rebellion, and Ishabel's accusation that Abner, the commander of the army of Judah, was intending to take over. The important point is that in every one of these stories, it's a political act meant to show that someone intended on assuming the leadership role. And so, with so many examples in the Tanakh that clearly give the motivation for a son to sleep with his father's concubine, is there any other reason to suspect that this may be at least one of the possible motivations for Reuben? You see? In other words, what I'm suggesting to you is that as we study the scriptures thematically, making key thematic connections to other texts that involve the same or similar themes, Adonai will provide answers for us. Note that the story immediately, now, this is what I want you to do. I want you, because we've made the point that that in these 3 examples that these were examples of political maneuvering. Something happened which triggered within the son to say, "Hey, I'm going to take over right now." Now, note the story immediately preceding the story of Reuben's sin. If you go and if you read in Genesis 35 verses 16 through 20. You will read that the story that immediately preceded when Reuben went and lay with Bilhah is the story of the birth of Benjamin and the death of Rachel. Remember that. It was the death of Rachel. And immediately after Rachel dies, we hear a story of how Reuben tries to assert his leadership. Is there a connection? Why was this an opportune time for Reuben to assert his leadership? Let's find out why. Everyone knew that Jacob loved Rachel more, okay? The text explicitly stated that earlier in Genesis, that Jacob loved Rachel more than Leah. And you remember when Esau was coming to meet Jacob, and remember Jacob feared for his lives? And what did he do? Remember, he sent the concubine women and their children to Esau first. He sent Leah and her children second. And last but not least, his favorites, he sent Rachel and Joseph last. Now imagine what all of the other wives and the brothers felt when this happened, because they all know that Jacob had feared for his life, and they knew that they were being kind of offered up first, so to speak, and that Jacob had saved the best for last. But the point that I'm trying to make was this thought was never, this event was never forgotten. Everyone knew that Jacob loved Rachel the most. So the question will arise as to which, here's something else that's going on here. The question is going to arise as to which firstborn will be the firstborn. Because remember, Jacob had two wives. Will it be Rachel's firstborn, Joseph, or Leah's firstborn, Reuben or Reuben, who was actually the firstborn chronologically? I mean, he was the first of Jacob's sons. But as we've seen in the Torah, the one who is physically first hasn't been the one to get the blessing. So the point that I'm trying to make is that Reuben has not appreciated Jacob's choice of Rachel and her children, over Leah. That shouldn't be not of Leah, but over Leah. And I want to give you another example of how I know that Reuben, that this has been in Reuben's mind. Reuben has hated the fact that Jacob loved Rachel more than his own mother Leah. You remember the Dudaim or the mandrakes? Remember what had happened was, remember Leah had given birth to a number of children, and then Leah was barren for a while, and then remember Rachel gave her handmaiden to Jacob, and her handmaiden had children, and as a response to Leah's barrenness, you remember in, let's find it here, I'm going to find this here, and I'm going to do like Brad Scott, I'm going to shuffle the pages as I turn. I like when I'm listening to Brad, and you can hear him shuffling the pages. I think that's really cute. I better stop, I'm getting too many wrinkles in my book here. But let's see, where are we? Let's go to Genesis chapter 30. And we're going to read up in verse 14. Reuben went out in the days of the wheat harvest and found Dudaim or mandrakes in the field and brought them to Leah his mother. All right, now, what's going on here? Well, I have another teaching on the think tank here where I show that what's going on is that these Dudaim or these mandrakes, they were noted for fertility enhancers. That's what it was. There were legends associated with the Dudaim. As a matter of fact, I wish I remember which lesson is. If you just go back to the drop-down menu, you will see the title. It has something to do with Reuben again. I think it's Reuben's mandrakes or Reuben's Dudaim or something like that. But there we show how the Torah itself teaches. The Torah itself explicitly teaches through themes that these mandrakes or Dudaim, that they were fertility enhancers. And so Reuben, again, Reuben is an advocate for his mother Leah. And she had been barren for quite some time. It seemed as if she had stopped bearing children. And so what he did was he brought the Dudaim so that his mother would become pregnant, knowing that, hoping then that Jacob would love her more. Okay? So now that Rachel is dead, Reuben is asserting that he will be the rightful firstborn who will lead the family. And he does this in a most dramatic manner. The Tanakh's quintessential act of repudiation of prior leadership and self-exaltation. He slept with his father's concubine. And his motivation was that he wanted to show that he was taking over. He was going to be the firstborn. He was going to lead. He's taking over leadership for his father. And so to show that, he did what Adonijah did, he did what Absalom did, and he did what Ishbosheth accused Abner of doing. he slept with the king's concubine. And so again, I hope that this has taught you again the importance of looking for themes and studying thematically. I hope that it's another example of how the Torah, how we can learn many things about the motivation behind the patriarchs and people in the Tanakh, so that we can gain a greater appreciation of the scriptures, and so that we can understand them and make better application to our lives. Because before we can make application, we have to understand what the scriptures are saying. So I hope this has been a blessing to you, and I pray in the name of Yeshua that Adonai will bless you, that he will bless your Torah study. I pray that Adonai would open your eyes to behold wondrous things from his Torah. I just thank you for spending this time with us. In Yeshua's name, amen.
I have the joy that is my salvation.